The notification arrived while I was at work, in the middle of a normal day. Overdue payment. Vehicle loan. My fingers froze. I didn't have a new car. I'd never bought anything for that amount. I opened the bank app with my heart in my throat, and there it was, a large debt, in my name, with payments I never authorized. For a second, I thought it was fraud, some kind of scam. But the more I looked at the details, the more familiar they seemed. The delivery address was my parents' house. The dealership name was the same one my father used to take his car to. My stomach turned. A sentence flashed through my mind like a flash. My father used my name. I ran out of the office, my heart pounding like a drum. I called my mother on the way. She answered, calm as if nothing had happened. "Oh, your father was going to tell you. It was just to help your sister." My vision darkened. That wasn't just. It was my name, my credit, my peace. I trembled with rage. I felt as if I'd been robbed, but the thief had my last name. Share this story. To reach further, subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment. I ran to their house. I entered without knocking. My father was in the garage, and it was there, amid the paint cans and the smell of oil, that the truth hit me like a punch in the gut. He looked at me as if I hadn't done anything wrong. "You have credit, she doesn't. You just had to sign." And then I understood. The problem wasn't the debt. It was how much I'd never been respected. My sister appeared soon after, her new car gleaming behind her. A white sedan, its seats still wrapped in plastic. She was smiling. "Thanks for that, bro." I stared at her, speechless. Didn't she know? Didn't she understand? Or worse, did she know and didn't care? My father put his hand on my shoulder, as if to end the conversation. "You're the responsible one." We knew it would work out. It tore me apart. I'd always been the responsible one, the one who studied, the one who worked from an early age. And that was exactly why they used me, because they knew I wouldn't explode. They knew I'd stay silent. My sister had never been charged for anything, and now I had a car in my name, and the debt on my credit card. My patience was wearing thin. I tried to maintain control. I asked if they'd even read the contract. My father shrugged. "I signed it for you. I needed to be quick." I almost laughed, nervously. That was a crime. It was a breach of trust, and he sounded like he'd done me a favor. My mother appeared in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee, saying, "Let's talk calmly." But calm doesn't pay bills. Calm doesn't clear your name. I took a deep breath and looked them both in the eye. I said, in the strongest voice I could muster, "You've crossed all the lines. This isn't going to end well." My sister finally seemed to realize the gravity of it, but I really needed the car. And me? What did I need? My dignity, my future, my name? None of that seemed to matter to them. That night, I returned home and locked myself in my room. I grabbed all my statements, spreadsheets, passwords, everything. I began documenting every detail. I didn't yet know what I was going to do, but I knew that, for the first time, I would protect myself. And maybe, just maybe, I would do what I'd never done, stand up to my own parents. I spent the night digging through it and discovered the entire contract, my name, my social security number, even my signature, a fake. They forged my signature. The contract stated that I was the buyer, the legal guardian. What's more, the card number linked to the automatic debit was mine. My father put everything in my name as if it were normal, as if I were just a bridge. I remembered the times he'd say, "Family is trust." And now, it echoed in my head like a mockery. They trusted me not to react. They trusted me to keep quiet, as I always had. But something inside me was changing. It wasn't just indignation. It was a new feeling, of rupture, of the end of a cycle. I no longer wanted to be the good guy. I went to the bank in the morning. I told them everything. I showed them my documents. The clerk looked at me with pity and said, "You know this could lead to legal action against your own family, right?" I knew. And yet, I continued. Because if they weren't afraid to ruin my name, why would I be afraid to protect my future? I was advised to file a complaint. I left with butterflies in my stomach, but with a protocol in hand. The penny dropped when I hung up with the credit company. They had already flagged my name for negative review. My credit score plummeted. I could no longer finance anything, rent an apartment, or make large purchases. All this for a car that wasn't even mine. A car my sister was now showing off on social media with the caption, "Conquest." What conquest? I sent a message to the family group. Cold, to the point. You have 48 hours to remove my name from this contract and assume the debt, or it will be settled in court. Silence. Then, a reply from my father. I can't believe you're going to do this to us. I swallowed hard. They used my name, and now I was the villain. The next day, I got a call from my grandmother. She was crying. Son, your father is devastated. He said you're cheating on him. It was unbelievable. They'd turned everything around. They'd turned the victim into the villain. And my father, a master of emotional manipulation, was now playing the resentment card, as if my actions were an attack, not a defense. I took a deep breath. I asked for respect, but inside, I was falling apart. I spent the entire day wrestling with memories of how many times I'd put my sister's dreams before my own, of how many times I'd helped with her chores, covered for mistakes, and said, it's okay when it wasn't. I'd always been the older brother, the example. But now I understood. I was the ladder, the one everyone steps on to climb, and I'd accepted that for too long. I stopped to remember the first time I noticed this difference. I was 15, she was 12. I wanted a laptop for studying, but they said it was expensive. 3 months later, she got a new cell phone as a gift, because she was sad. That made an impression on me, but as always, I swallowed it. I was trained to accept it, to keep quiet, to keep the peace. But keeping the peace came at the cost of my own internal war. That night, I got a text from my sister. Sorry, I didn't know they were going to use your card. I thought it was a deal between them. I wanted to believe it, but I couldn't ignore the fact that she'd been driving that car for weeks. She knew it wasn't hers. She knew she couldn't afford it, and yet she'd silently accepted it all. The truth? She was part of the problem, even without admitting it. I grabbed my old diary, the one I no longer used, and I wrote, today I decided to stop being a ladder. If they want to climb, they'll have to walk on their own. And I slammed it shut. Because in that moment, I finally understood. The pain only changes when we stop carrying it alone. 2 days after the ultimatum, no response, no apology, no proposal, just silence. But it wasn't a silence of reflection. It was the silence of someone who felt entitled to ignore. My parents acted as if nothing had happened, as if the problem was my behavior, not the fraud they'd committed. This destroyed me more than any debt. I started to feel the real financial pressure. My credit card was blocked. I lost the pre-approval for a rental I needed to close to move out. I was starting to lack basic necessities, all because of a debt that wasn't mine. I called the bank again. The representative said, your name is on the blacklist. Without legal action, there's not much we can do. That's when I decided I was going to file a lawsuit. I sat alone, with the documents open, and cried. I cried like I hadn't cried in years, not for the debt, but for the betrayal, for the messages that never arrived, for my mother who didn't defend me, for my father who silenced me, for the sister who pretended not to see, for the loneliness of being the only one who cared about what was right. It was like screaming in an empty room. I sent a formal email to the lawyer. He responded quickly. He said he'd handled similar cases before, parents who used their children as financial shields. It's going to hurt, but you're right, he said. That gave me a ray of courage, because for the first time, someone looked at me and said, you're not crazy. You're being wronged, and that's serious. I went to sleep scared, but also relieved, because now it wasn't just me against them. It was me for myself, for my story, for my life, for my peace. And if that was the price of no longer being a ladder, then I would pay. But I wouldn't pay their debt. I would pay the cost of my freedom. When the bailiff arrived at my parents' house to deliver the notice, all hell broke loose. I received calls, audio messages, and long messages from my mother crying, how could you have the nerve? This is going to destroy us. I listened to it all in silence, because it wasn't courage. It was survival. They destroyed my stability. I just wanted my life back. My father called me the next day. His voice was cold and cutting. You chose this path, so now you have to face the consequences. Consequences? As if I'd done something wrong. He blocked me soon after. My sister posted indirect messages on social media. The worst betrayal is the one that comes from within. The comments were all in her favor, as if I were a monster. I was painted as ungrateful, as someone who put money above family. But no one there asked how I was doing. No one questioned the absurdity of the forgery. They only fed the narrative that I was the problem. This revolted me, but it also strengthened me. Because now I saw how much that family lived on a facade. on image, on emotional control disguised as love. The lawyer I hired reinforced, they're reacting because they know you're right. They're trying to isolate you. And that was exactly what happened. I felt like I was being expelled from a place that had never truly welcomed me. But this time, I didn't cry. I didn't back down. I continued the process. Each step was an affirmation. I exist, and I will no longer erase myself for anyone. I unfollowed, muted the family group, blocked comments. I protected myself, and in this forced silence they created, I found something I never had inside: respect for myself. As the process progressed, something unexpected began to happen. Distant relatives began reaching out to me. Uncles, cousins, people who had always remained silent. One by one, they came to tell me similar stories. Your father did this under your grandfather's name. Your sister was always protected. You were always the pillar because they knew you could handle it. And then, it hit me. I wasn't the first one to be used. I was just the first one to say no. These accounts shook me. While they hurt, they strengthened me. I wasn't exaggerating. I wasn't overly sensitive. They had used my name, yes. And it wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. A familiar cycle of convenience and silence. Only this time, the silence broke. And when a silence breaks, the noise disturbs those who lived comfortably within it. I started writing about everything, without naming names, but making it clear that it was real. I created an anonymous blog. I wrote late into the night, expressing the hurt, the indignation, the grief of the family I thought I had. And people began to relate. Comments like, "I went through this. My dad did the same thing. I thought it was just me." That became my escape and my healing. Little by little, I transformed pain into a voice. With each text, I felt less like a victim, more like an author, more like the owner of my own story, even though it still hurt inside, even though sleeping was difficult, even though I cried in secret. It was different now. I was no longer silent. And that, in itself, was a revolution. Because when you say no, for the first time in a family that only accepts obedience, you become an enemy, but you also become free. And even though freedom hurts, it never hurts more than living in obscurity. One day, I received a notice. A hearing was scheduled. The date stared back at me like a mirror. There, in that courtroom, I would have to face my own family as an opponent. My lawyer called me and said, "Are you ready for this?" I didn't know, but I also knew I couldn't go back. I had already lost my name. I wasn't going to lose my voice, too. I started having nightmares. I dreamed of my mother crying on the bench, of my father lying, turning the tables on me, of my sister feigning surprise. But what hurt most was the fear of regret. What if they were right? What if I was being too harsh? This doubt gnawed at me, because deep down I still wanted to be accepted. But acceptance without respect isn't love, it's submission. And I didn't want that anymore. I wanted relationships where my existence wasn't currency, where my kindness wasn't exploited, where my responsibility wasn't used as justification for my sacrifice. The hearing became a symbol of this. It wasn't just about the car. It was about who I was and who I wanted to be. I arrived at the first session with sweaty palms. They were just there. No look, no word, as if I were a stranger. And in that moment, I understood. Maybe I always had been. Maybe what kept me in that house was usefulness, not love. And as much as it hurt, realizing this freed me. Because sometimes, the pain of the truth is less than the weight of the lie you carry for years, just to feel accepted. And in that courtroom, even though I was shaking, I began to stand up completely, for the first time. During the hearing, my father was the first to speak. He stood with that confident posture he always had, as if the world was in his control. But what came out of his mouth destroyed me inside. He's always been emotionally unstable. We just tried to help. That wasn't a defense. It was an attack, a direct blow to my sanity. I trembled in my seat. My mother lowered her head as he spoke. She wouldn't look at me. It was as if she felt ashamed, but didn't have the courage to intervene. My sister sat the entire time without saying a word. Their lawyer claimed it was all a family misunderstanding. They tried to reduce the crime to a miscommunication, as if using someone's name without consent was just a technical error. When it was my turn, I looked the judge in the eye, took a deep breath, and told him everything, without shouting, without dramatizing. I talked about the documents, the statements, the fake signature, the billing, the card freeze, but most of all, I talked about the pain, the feeling of having been traded for a car, the coldness, the lack of remorse. My voice cracked, but I continued to the end. Because I wasn't there to appear strong. I was there to be truthful. The judge asked a few questions. My lawyer answered firmly. And finally, the hearing was adjourned for a review of the evidence. I left without a sentence, but with something inside me that said there was no turning back. The image of my father trying to tarnish my reputation in front of strangers was the end of any illusions I still harbored. He wasn't my childhood hero. Never was. He was just someone accustomed to winning through manipulation. I spent the next few days reviewing everything I'd let slip by for love. The favors, the loans, their ways of solving things. I understood that my kindness had been misinterpreted as weakness, but now the line had been drawn, and no matter how much it hurt, I wouldn't back down. The truth cost me dearly, but the price of silence was greater. A week later, my blog went viral. Someone shared one of the posts, and it began circulating in groups, pages, and large profiles. Within hours, hundreds of comments. People were telling similar stories. Young people, adults, even the elderly, all describing the same cycle. Children used, manipulated, silenced. It was as if my story had unlocked the pain of thousands, and it gave me chills. I received a message from a podcast producer. He said, "Your story needs to be heard." I accepted the invitation. I was afraid, but I did. And there, in front of the microphone, I told everything. No names, no anger, just the truth. I talked about the audience, the credit card bill, the emotional abandonment. I talked about the weight of having been the useful son. And in the end, I spoke about the choice I made, no longer carry what was not mine. The episode broke records. People from all over the country started following me. They sent audio messages, texts, videos. They said, "Thank you for having courage. You spoke for me. I saw myself in you." It was intense, emotional, but also difficult. Because every time someone said, "I went through that too," my pain returned. Only now, it returned with a new meaning, strength. So I decided to create a social project, a space for young people to learn about finances, family boundaries, and emotional independence. Because no one ever taught me that. And maybe, if they had, I would have said no much sooner. The project grew. It hurt to grow, but it hurt more to remain silent. And that's when I realized, when you give voice to your truth, it stops being a burden and becomes a tool. The pain doesn't disappear, but it shifts. And sometimes, it becomes a bridge for others to cross as well. 2 weeks after the podcast, I received a letter, handwritten. It was from my mother. She began by saying, "I'm sorry for being silent." The words were heavy, but sincere. She admitted that she knew what they did to me was wrong. She said she didn't have the courage to stand up to my father, and that this tormented her every day. For the first time, I felt like someone was seeing me. She spoke about the hearing, saying she never imagined it would go this far, but she also acknowledged it was the only way you could be heard. She now understood that the strong son also breaks, that the responsible also tires, and that you can't expect someone to endure everything just because they always have. I read the letter with trembling hands, feeling a mixture of anger, relief, and sadness. At the end of the letter, there was a sentence that stuck with me. "You didn't destroy the family. You saved yourself." That's when I cried, because for the first time, someone in my family stood up for me. Even if it was late, even if it was in writing, it was still not enough. It still hurt, but it was a step. And steps matter when you come from so much silence. I put the letter in a box. I didn't reply. Not then, because there were still too many open wounds. But I didn't tear it up, because part of me wanted to believe she was trying, and that somehow she too was a victim of this dysfunctional family system that rewarded abuse and punished autonomy. She too needed to break this cycle, and perhaps she was starting to. Days later, my sister texted me. I read the blog. I listened to the podcast. I was blind. She was direct, blunt. She admitted she'd benefited from the system. And that deep down, she'd always known. She said the car had been sold, that the money had been used to pay off part of the debt, that she was trying to rebuild, and wanted one day to apologize to me in person. I didn't respond with forgiveness, but I responded with something better. Truth. I sent a simple message. Now you understand. And that alone changes everything. Because forgiveness doesn't have to come with a hug. Sometimes it just needs to come with awareness. Months later, the judge issued the final ruling. The contract was annulled. The debt was removed from my name. My credit would be reevaluated. Everything I'd fought to prove was recognized in court. My lawyer smiled and shook my hand. You won. But the truth is, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. A tiredness that only those who fight with those they love understand. Because winning there meant accepting that I'd lost something bigger. I left the courthouse alone. None of my family was there. No hugs, no gestures, just silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was an empty silence, the kind that comes after the end. I took the elevator with my hands in my pockets, looked at my reflection and thought, was it worth it? And the answer came clear. Yes, thanks. Because now, the name that carried weight carries my story. I returned home and opened the email. Proposals from publishers. They wanted to turn my story into a book. I turned most of them down. I didn't want to glamorize my pain. I wanted to turn it into something useful, something that would help others identify their limits, to say no before it was too late. I turned it all into a guide, When Love Becomes Debt, a direct, real, necessary book. With the launch came invitations to speak. I wrote more, I spoke more, and I was heard. Every person who said, "You saved my future," was a scar healing. The pain became a path. And I, who had nearly been destroyed by my own family's name, was now remembered for giving names back to those who had nearly lost them. My parents never mentioned it again, and I never went home. But now, I understand. Not going back is also a way to heal, because you can forgive and still protect yourself. You can love and choose distance. You can remember without repeating. That night, I closed the deal with the publisher, and I slept with my head on a clean pillow, free of debt, free of guilt, free of fear. For the first time, my name was just mine. I received the invitation by email. My old school wanted me to speak to students about family choices and boundaries. For a second, I hesitated. Returning to that neighborhood, that city, that past felt like opening a box I'd rather keep locked. But after everything, I understood that I couldn't grow up without, at least once, looking back. I arrived early in the auditorium, sat in the front seat, and took a deep breath. The same smell of polished floors, the same tall windows, but I wasn't the same. As the students filed in, laughing, chatting, taking photos, I thought about the boy I'd been in there, the exemplary, quiet son who kept everything to himself, the same one who did his sister's homework, who pretended it didn't hurt to be forgotten, who tried so hard to be noticed, and failed. The same one who, years later, nearly lost everything by trusting too much. When I took the microphone, my hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was a weight, the weight of someone who knows that every word now carries many other voices along with his own. I spoke for 40 minutes without a script. I told my story as it was, raw, real, without embellishment. I talked about the abuse of trust within the family, about how too much affection without responsibility becomes manipulation, and about the danger of always being the child who gets it. The eyes of those teenagers stared intently at me. Some were crying. At the end, a girl raised her hand and said, "I needed to hear that. My mom put a card in my name too, and I thought it was normal." It cut me open and healed me. After the talk, I received notes, hugs, and questions. Students and professors told me they'd never heard anyone talk about it like that. Without judgment, but with truth. That was it. That was what I needed to do. Not turn my pain into a spectacle, but into a tool, into protection. Because if someone had done this for me years ago, maybe I wouldn't have had to bleed so much to learn to defend myself. In the car, on the way home, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the school moving away. But something remained. Maybe the boy I was, the one who cried silently, the one who tried to be strong for everyone. And I took with me only the man I became, the one who learned that protecting yourself is never selfish. It's self-love, and no one should apologize for that. I got home, took off my shoes, and sat on the living room floor. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't pick up my phone. I just breathed. For the first time in years, I felt no weight, no debt, no guilt, just presence. Being with me without noise was the gift I had never given myself. A short time later, I got a call from my sister. She wanted to see me. She said she was going through a process of change, in therapy, trying to understand herself. We met at a discreet cafe far from home, without warning anyone. When she arrived, I noticed she was different, not in the way she dressed, but in the way she looked. There was a guilt there that wasn't just recent. It was old. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then she began. She told me everything, that she always felt overprotected, that she saw my efforts and pretended not to, that she felt indebted to me, not financially but morally. She said the car was the trigger, but the truth is she knew all along that I was the family's shield, and the worst part was that she settled for it, because it was easy, because it was convenient, because I never said no. When she finished, I didn't cry. I just breathed. I thanked her for her courage, and I told her I didn't expect redemption, nor compensation, only respect from now on. I said I was happy she was changing, but that I wasn't the same anymore. I'm not your ladder anymore, I said, and I won't be again, but I'm glad you're climbing down on your own now. She nodded, and that was the closure we never had. There was no hug, no photo, just a take care of yourself before leaving. But it was enough, because not every reconciliation needs to feel like a margarine commercial. Sometimes, it's just about each person following their own path without carrying the other person's burden. And if that's maturity, then it was what I needed most at that stage of my life. I returned home, opened the closet, and found that old envelope with my mother's letter. For the first time, I was able to reread it without anger. I put it in a file, along with the court documents, not as a reminder of the pain, but as proof that it had ended. A kind of ritual. Close, file, move on. Because closing with awareness is as important as beginning with courage. The next day, I did something symbolic. I removed my name from the family group. No one commented. No one reached out to me. But I didn't expect anyone to. Because true freedom isn't about making others understand. It's about stopping expecting them to understand. And in that silence, I found the peace I had been searching for in words. Today, my name is clean. On paper, in the banks, in the market. But most importantly, it's clean within me. I no longer carry the guilt that wasn't mine, nor the emotional debts I was taught to swallow as love. My name now is more than a signature. It's a boundary, a territory, and no one steps on it without permission. My story isn't about revenge. It's about choice. The choice to break a cycle, even if it means being alone for a while. The choice to put yourself first, after a lifetime of being everyone's support. The choice to speak out, to report, to protect yourself, even if they call you ungrateful for it. The truth is, no one cares about those who never assert themselves. Today, when I look back, I see that all of that, the debt, the betrayal, the process, was a journey. Painful, yes. Lonely, often, but necessary. Because if I hadn't gone through that, I might still be living as a shadow in someone else's story. Now, I'm the protagonist of my own, and that's priceless. I don't talk to my father anymore, and that's okay. I don't need to force a bond that only existed when I was useful. My mother writes to me sometimes. I read. Sometimes I reply. Sometimes I don't. My sister, she's rebuilding her path, and I hope she never again has to climb on anyone's back to achieve anything. But around here, my ground is solid, and whoever wants to walk with me will have to come with the truth. I put all the court papers in a box. On top of it, I wrote a sentence. Never again be silent to fit in where they don't respect you. This is my rule now. For friendships, work, relationships, for everything. Because the most precious lesson of my life was simple. You can love someone and still say no. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel, send this video to a WhatsApp group, and comment here where you're listening from. I'll read it all. And if you've been through something similar, know this. You're not alone. Your name has value, and your voice has power.